This video is sponsored by King of Cardfight. For more information on tournaments, deck lists, or setting up your own King of Cardfight tournament at your locals, go to kingofcardfight.com. Hello again, friends. In November of 2013, I released an article called How Likely Is It to Die at 3 Damage to a Double Crit? The article was pretty well received, but is significantly less relevant now than it was then due to varying amounts of drive checks being performed. So I am updating and expanding that article to cover double criticals off of triple drives and triple criticals off of triple drives. This video will cover double criticals off of twin drives and triple criticals off of triple drives. Instead of covering all 200 or so calculations for this video, my plan is to instead address the odds for the most common trigger lineups. These lineups are 16 critical, 12 critical, and 8 critical. Let's go ahead and get right into it. 16 criticals is an extremely aggressive trigger lineup that is now being punished by being unable to utilize G-Guardians. I see this most commonly in Grade 1 and Grade 2 Rush decks. However, for decks like Ripple Rush 3.0, which do ride to Grade 3 and attempt to stride for game, or Stern Blaukluger decks that don't want to heal out of their restand, this information may still be relevant. The odds of hitting 2 critical triggers with a 16 critical lineup with a twin drive is 10.2%. This is slightly over a 1 in 10 chance. However, you aren't dead just because they hit the triggers, you can still, of course, heal out of losing the game. If your damage is the same or more than your opponent, the odds of healing out of a 3 damage attack are 22.98%. This is a fairly close to a 1 in 4 chance. Your adjusted odds of losing the game when your opponent is attacking with a twin drive and has 16 criticals in their deck, while you both have 3 damage, ends up being 7.856%. This means that you have a 7.856% chance to lose if you no-guard an opponent that has 16 criticals in their deck and you're at 3 damage. And they're at 3 damage. You can see that the odds of surviving an attack that you no-guard are actually pretty good, even against a 16 critical deck. If your opponent has 4 damage, that would make your first trigger unable to heal you. So, adjusting for only being able to heal on 2 checks, we have the odds of dying from the double crit at 8.59%. If the opponent is at 5 damage, we can of course only heal on the last check, so our odds of dying from the double critical become 9.37%. That covers the in-depth version of what each of these numbers are going to represent, so I'll be able to expedite further statistics. The odds of being triple crit by your opponent with them having 16 criticals in deck would be about 3.04%. The odds of dying when your opponent does this while they're at 2 damage would be 2.138%. The odds of dying when the opponent is at 3 damage would be 2.341%. At 4 damage, 2.56%. And at 5 damage, 2.792%. You can see that the difference is a lot more varied in this particular example, just due to how many potential chances you have to heal from 2 damage to 5 damage. And that actually swung it by 25% of its entire value. That's actually a pretty big swing. Moving on to 12 criticals, this is the go-to lineup for most decks that don't have a busted stand trigger or draw trigger, and don't need to move triggers to soul like Thingsaver does. Let's see what the numbers are for this particular lineup. The odds of double critting someone with a twin drive would be 5.6%. The odds of dying when the opponent is at 3 damage would be 4.313%. The odds of dying when the opponent's at 4 damage would be 4.73%, and 5 damage would be 5.14%. I'll cover this a little bit more in depth later on, but the first thing that you'll notice about these numbers is that they're roughly half of the numbers that you get when running 16 critical triggers. The impact and consistency that you'll notice between 12 and 16 critical triggers is that you're twice as likely to double critical with 16 critical triggers over 12. This is one of the primary reasons that I pushed that lineup so hard for so long. The odds of triple crit with triple drive and 12 critical triggers would be 1.194%. The odds of dying when the opponent's at 2 damage would be 0.84%. 3 damage would be 0.92%. 4 damage would be 1.005%, and 5 damage would be 1.097%. Rounding up this first video, we have the standard 8 critical lineup that has been the bread and butter for Vanguard for quite a while. Believe it or not, new players, people used to be ridiculed and called Saki for running 12 criticals back in the early days of the game, even though building your deck for consistently hitting one type of trigger and not running the other would actually be the opposite of Saki. Logical fallacies aside, 8 criticals have the following odds of getting a double critical on a twin drive: 2.38%. At 3 damage, you will die at about 1.833% of the time. At 4 damage, about 2% of the time, and 5 damage, about 2.19% of the time. We can see that the odds of losing the game decrease even more drastically from 12 criticals to 8 criticals than they did from 16 to 12. At this point, you are more than 4 times less likely to lose to critical triggers than from a 16 critical deck. Additionally, you are more than 2 times as likely to die from critical triggers than from a 12 critical deck. The odds of getting a triple critical trigger with triple drive and 8 critical triggers in deck is only 0.304%. The odds of dying is only 0.214% from 2 damage, 0.234% from 3 damage, 0.256% from 4 damage, and 0.279 from 5 damage. We can see on this chart that for double crits on a twin drive, 16 critical decks are 4 times as likely to get the double critical than 8 critical decks, and twice as likely to get the double critical than 12 critical decks. We can also see that 16 critical decks are about 10 times more likely to triple crit than 8 critical decks, and about 2.5 times more likely to triple crit than 12 critical decks. If you want to know the odds for any particular trigger lineup not mentioned, my blog posts that are linked in the video description have every single trigger lineup under the sun and every single damage amount that your opponent could be at. That's it for this video. I plan on doing another one to discuss double crits at 3 damage with Twin Drive, but I'm not quite done plugging in all of the numbers for that one. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a good one.